This time in the Magic Kitchen, we are joined by Devin Hunter to talk about houseplant horticulture.
I'm Leandra Witchwood.
And I'm Elise Wells.
And welcome to the Magic Kitchen podcast, where we talk about magic, kitchen witchcraft, herbs,
and everything in between.
As you may know, the Magic Kitchen podcast is fully and independently funded by the Witchwood Tea House. So show us some support and head over to thewitchwoodteahouse.com to purchase some deliciously hand-blended loose leaf teas or one of my other botanical products. As a special thank you for your support, please use pod 15 at checkout to take 15% off of your next order. So without any further ado, let's get to the episode. Blessed be. Okay. Oh, so Elise, you're busy. What's going on?
Well, as everyone's listening to this, I am at the Athens Irish Festival. One of my billion hats I wear is one of the organizers for the Athens Irish Festival. So I'm very excited about it. And hopefully, I'm going to say it like it's happening, that it's going well.
It is going well.
Yeah. we have a lot of people signed up to go as of recording this. So I'm excited for it.
Good.
But I'm very, very excited because tomorrow, as of you listening, I will be traveling to the south of France for a retreat with a friend of mine, Natalia Dugler. She's on Instagram as Unleash the Goddess, if you follow her. And she is a priestess. She's a water priestess and an initiated rose priestess, which the rose priestess lineage is truly an enigma to me. I'm excited to tell you what I learned after attending this, because every source I find has different answers for what it can be, like many spiritual paths, I suppose. But it's a connection between deities and priestesses that is really, really inviting to me. It's like really cool. Something I've been learning. So Mary Magdalene's story is one of those tales that experiences that, like she plays a priestess role to the deity she works with, which in that case is Jesus. But Isis had the same relationship with her priestesses that we have recorded. And Inanna has her famous priestess, Enheduanna, who was the very first published author in the world. Her tablets in cuneiform are poetry, sacred poetry to Inanna that were published at that time, talking 3,600 years ago, I believe. So that sort of priestess relationship with the land, with the elements, and with the divine is what I'm hoping to get out of this experience. Yeah. So it's going to be very exciting.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear about your experience. I think it's going to be great. It sounds amazing.
Yeah. And I have a course coming up for this summer, so stay tuned. If you're not on my newsletter, you can go to seekingnumina.com and sign up for it. And I will announce it there. There's always some early bird tickets as well, which patrons get first dibs, and then it goes out to the newsletter before it goes public. So for discount tickets. So if you're on that newsletter, it's definitely the place to be. But I won't say more now. I've sort of talked a little bit about it on social media, but I do have a cool course coming up this summer that I'm excited to share.
Good.
Stay tuned.
Good.
So tell me, what are you doing?
Oh, God, I am all over the frickin' place. So I just, this month we just came back from the Fairy Festival, which was a rainy, crazy, fun weekend. It was, even though it was raining, it was still fun. It was still, a lot of people came out. So hopefully next year we have sun. Let's start manifesting that now.
Yeah.
So I've been spending the past few weeks catching up and planning. And so I recently have been invited to lead a workshop and to help run a kitchen witch weekend with Wendy Mata, and go back in some of our episodes. I think it's season 6. I don't remember which episode, but she is the Bruja Botanica, Bruja Power. And we've done a few things in collaboration with her. And so now I get to do one in person with her. So we're going to do a whole Kitchen Witch weekend where we're going to get together June 20th through the 24th. As we are speaking right now, she still has one spot available. So if you really want to go, it's in Maryland. So if you're in the area, you really want to go, I recommend like snatching that spot up. But this weekend sold out pretty fast. I think the only reason she has a spot is because somebody had to cancel. But we're going to cook together. We're going to sing together. We're going to drum together. She has an amazing drummer coming. She was just telling me about it yesterday. And I'm so excited for this because I'm a horrible drummer. So anybody who can like facilitate drumming and then I can get in behind that, like I'm all over it. So I'm going to bring my drum and the workshop I'm teaching awesome. It's going to be so fun. So the workshop I'm teaching it's connecting with plant spirits, but then learning to blend your own tea using the direction of land spirits, or not, plant spirits, excuse me. So I'm going to bring some select herbs with me that we get to connect with. And then from those herbs, you get to blend your own unique tea and then take that home and work with it and work with those energy of the plants. But first I'm going to teach you how to identify and connect with those energies. So that's fun. That's kind of like, that's my thing. I love it.
Yeah. That's like so in your element. No pun intended.
It is. It's right up my alley. Then I have some free courses coming up that I'll put just check my links page at leandrawitchwood.com. And I'll put the link in the show notes. But later this year in August, I'll be at Temple Fest with Christopher Penzak's group. So I'll be teaching another workshop there. It involves tea, of course, and it's Sacred Shadows. So this is like summer is ramping up. Like it's going to be busy. Yeah. But I'm excited. Really it's good stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really excited. Yeah, and other than that, I'm like just preparing for everything. And I'm still doing the women's circles at the Serpent's Key. I am taking a break until I think July because there's so many things coming down the pipeline that I'm not going to host my next one until July. And I think that'll be the Warrior.
Very nice. Yeah.
The Warrior aspect.
Oh, that's really good. And before we jump into the interview, I also have been getting a lot of questions about my tarot readings. Ooh. So if you would like to book a tarot reading with me, I do Zoom readings or I do recorded readings, which are audio recordings. In order to do one, I have you send me a photo of yourself so I can connect the cards to your energy more efficiently. And then you get this recording. And it sounds like when I first thought of offering it, I was like, man, I hope people don't think this is a strange offering. But I've gotten very, very good feedback because one, there's an ASMR of the shuffling that I have had 3 or 4 people comment on as like a great benefit. But also you get to go back and review that reading. It's condensed, it's usually 10 to 20 minutes long at the absolute longest, depending how many cards you get. And so you can just go back, reference it, make sure you remember what you remember. And you, of course, get a photo of the cards you got as well. So it's a really cool offering. And I just wanted to address it here that if you are thinking about it, we've had some very good feedback and it's fun. And they start at $5. So
not bad.
Why not?
That's reasonable.
Yeah. It's not even a coffee anymore in the US.
It's not. Oh my gosh. Like things have gotten really out of control.
Yeah.
But
so yeah, I'd love to read for y'all this summer if you've been thinking about it.
Definitely.
Devin Hunter is the best-selling author of the Witch's Book of Power series, the critically acclaimed Modern Witch, and Crystal Magic for the Modern Witch. Initiated into multiple occult orders, Devin is the founder of the Sacred Fires tradition of witchcraft and co-founder of the Black Rose tradition of witchcraft. He hosts the Modern Witch podcast, recommended by both the AV Club and Glamour, and he's co-owner of Datura Trading Company. Visit him at modernwitch.com/Devin. Welcome. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
We are glad to have you. We love this book.
Yeah, we really love this book. It actually already has inspired a lot of conversation and discussion.
Yeah.
Like we ended up
Awesome.
doing a bonus episode this month in our Patreon and magical community online on urban plant connection. And we referenced your book and recommended it throughout because it is really, it's really a good resource for that. Like it's the book I wish I had when I lived in Baltimore and was struggling so hard to, like you do what you can do, but this would have been good.
Yeah. Thank you. That means a lot to me. I love hearing that. That's good. Balm for the soul. I appreciate
Good.
that.
I love that. I'm going to use that balm for the soul.
Balm for the soul. Yeah.
Soul salve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yesterday I just turned in the manuscript for
I was
my
like, is
next
it too
book.
early
Yeah.
to bring this up? I saw the cover. Yeah.
It's gonna be that is a wild ride, that whole experience. But and I was like, I don't want to release it yet because I just dropped Hortocculture and I don't want to but I realized just as I was turning everything in yesterday and kind of taking that sigh of relief because it's a lot of work getting a book done. And I couldn't sleep last night because my mind was still wired for books and things like that. But all of this to say that I have I just went through a really just exhausting experience with the book. So to hear good things about horticulture, that's excellent because it's as a writer you don't really know. And I was a little nervous about this one because of the topics that I jump into. And I know there was some things could be a little sensitive. And so I was a little nervous about this one. The thing about it, though, is that I was so excited. Like when I thought about writing it and I have like follow-ups to it that I really want to do. And hopefully Llewellyn will jump on that. But Horticulture was the easiest book for me to write. Like out of the 10 manuscripts that I've completed, it is the easiest one because there was something about the work and the magic that just poured into me and into my craft and into my life. And obviously, if anybody follows me online, I have like a ridiculous amount of houseplants, like an absurd amount of houseplants. So obviously they were making sure it was happening, right? Like when I was writing it. But yeah, the houseplant horticulture was a joy to write. It just flowed through me and it was quick. I think I wrote the whole thing in, I mean, honestly, 2 weeks. I had it outlined and all of that stuff. So I knew what I was going to write, but the sitting down to do it was so just me just tuning into something. It was just me plugging in and going away. It was very magical. It was a very, very cool experience.
Wow.
Gotta love
well,
those
and
plant
it
spirits.
flows that way. Like, especially, this is going to sound weird, but especially when I was reading the bit about like building your own substrate, I was like, Devin knows his shit. Like this is so channeled in a way. Like you were just, I could just see you there like, and then this, and well, I should mention that I usually use size 3 to 4 and it was just so like experiential. And I think that's something that nobody else could have wrote the book the right way about.
Thank you. Thank you. I was like, is this stupid details? Like it's that kind of stuff. We just don't.
It's so good.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
I think that stuff's important. And we also were kind of saying how it sort of heralds in a new genre of witchcraft books that we need more of, which is, niche. Like it's just about houseplants. Of course, not just. That's like quite a huge subject. But so often we're like, this isn't just green magic and houseplants as a chapter. It's just the houseplants. And I am excited to hear that you have more to say because even as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, and you could also do this and you could combine this with that. And there's definitely sequels I could see.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You're totally right. We're at the point now. I have been working in the metaphysical industry since I was 16. So I started working at a friend of mine had a store because I was one of those young people who had very much older friends. And she had a store and a flea market. And so I would go in on the weekends and I would do readings. And it was really just like I wanted to cut my teeth on the whole thing. But the flip side of it was like, money was tight. She was having a hard time with like the booth rent because it was like the pagan booth at like, a flea market. So I would go in and do readings. Wouldn't take any money because I had like rules against that at the time. And I had, ideas about that that no longer exist. Pay me. But, but at the time I was like, no. So I've been doing the work of like, selling books, I should say, in the market since I was about 16 years old. So a little over 20 years. And so in that whole time, I've seen things come and go. We've had two big blooms. I call them witch blooms, which we just got out of one with the pandemic, where people get very interested in witchcraft and the occult, and then they kind of go away. About every 7 to 10 years, we have a bloom of it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
in all of this, the material from like the 80s to about now hasn't changed a whole lot. Like, and in the idea that we're, because we're all going at it for the same point. We all want the same thing from it. So, and the other thing too, just as a bookseller, and somebody who had a shop and also writes books, I can tell you that most books don't sell like extreme amounts of money. My husband, Matt Oren, wrote Psychic Witch, huge book, huge book. No one could have anticipated that, especially coming out of a publishing house like Llewellyn. And so the impact that Psychic Witch had is unheard of, for the most part, but it isn't, in the sense that he did something. He took that, as you just said, that subset, right? Psychic development, and as it relates to witchcraft, and then really leaned in on it. And he did it in this really beautiful way and a meaningful time. So we were all hitting the pandemic, and people were turning inward, looking for work to do on themselves. And then here was Psychic Witch, and it was like, I can do that for you. So everyone really, it was this perfect timing, perfect book. And he did such a beautiful job with the way that he approached it. It was just really inspiring. And again, he's really aware of the market too, and things like that, because he's had a similar relationship with occult stores and things like that too. All of this to say that watching trends and things over the years, it's difficult to want deeper material, or material that really just focuses on a specific thing. But when most of the market, 70, like we know that from a tarot perspective, that like about 70, I think 73%, when I say 70, 73% of tarot decks sell to first time buyers, which means that you've only got about 28% of people, 27% of people who are going back to do that. So if we just kind of take that idea and apply it to witchcraft and witchcraft books, then we're going to say most books are being sold to newbies, right? They're being sold to people who aren't going to get value necessarily from taking a smaller subset of the material that we are all working with and diving into it. They're going to want something that's more general and more broad. The flip side of it too is that, like, you can't write advanced or intermediate material and have an expectation that we're all coming to the same table with the same skills. And that is kind of mind numbing sometimes, because I have to me, oh, if you're an intermediate witch, you should know how to meditate. You should know how to feel energy and sense those sorts of things. You should have some degree of spirit communication under your belt. You should, there's these certain things that I'm like, oh no, we should all just do that. As I'm writing a book though, I got to stop. And I got to go, okay, so this is how we talk to a spirit. Before that, this is what a spirit is. And so it's this really difficult thing of I know of so many authors who are really cool magicians and want to write really cool, trippy stuff, but it's never going to sell. It's never going to, because it would be so niche. So when it came, this idea for houseplant horticulture came up. It is a tongue twister. I was like, oh no, the world is obsessed with houseplants right now. If I'm going to do something that's like niche like this, now is the time. So let me just do this. Let's do this. And so I went to Llewellyn and I was like, listen, I know you're going to want this, like in a way that you've never wanted anything I've ever even thought about before. You're going to want this. And I pitched it to them exactly as what you get. I wanted a hardback. I wanted beautiful colors. I wanted art. Originally, the concept was to go with photos again. So my last two books had been all photos, and it was all pictorial stuff. And that was the original concept with this going into it. But I had just gotten through those two books. It's really hard to write a book. It's really hard to write and do full color photos for every single spell in a book. And I did that twice. And so I just was exhausted. And I was like, well, maybe we just find somebody to do the art, and I have a lot of arty friends. And so I just knew it needed to be colorful, but I was kind of willing to almost do anything, right? Just to make sure it was colorful and had those things. And I didn't want to have to do the photography. So I went to Llewellyn with the idea, and they, yes, very much were into it and very quickly jumped on it. And that was exciting. And I had no idea what was going to happen with the art. So it's kind of one of those things where, you could write something but you can have all these ideas about what it's going to look and feel like. But when it comes to publishing, you end up handing the manuscript over to a group of people who all have an opinion, who all went to college specifically to have this very unique opinion. And they are going to make sure that you know about their opinion. And that isn't a bad thing. That's actually a really good thing. And it's a beautiful thing, but it can be hard to digest sometimes, right? So I just was willing to, I knew, just from previous experiences, when she handed over, it's in the hands of the goddess. You just gotta let it be. And luckily, they came up, they kind of asked like, well, what's your favorite art style? I'm a watercolor painter. Like when I actually sit down and do physical painting, I like watercolor. And so I knew I wanted a watercolor artist. And they were like, oh, well, good for you, because we actually picked this watercolor artist that we want to work. We want this person to work with CeeLo Thompson, who has done incredible Oracle decks, is a phenomenal artist, especially when it comes to like botanical prints and botanical pictures and photos. So it was like, my oh, I hope I can get somebody who can do something, to like getting a master in that skill to actually come in and do this work. So phenomenal experience. I mean, and I just sent it in and I was very nervous, and CeeLo reached out and said, hey, I'm doing the art for your book. I'm really excited. If you need any help promoting or you need any help, let me know. Can I just tell you how unheard of this is? I'm rambling right now. So I've taken over and I'm just giving you guys all this background. But it's really random that somebody who's hired to do like a job comes in after they've been paid to help promote the thing, right? Like she just had to come in and paint some pictures for me. That's all she had to do. And instead, she's just been so interested and so supportive and helping to make sure that people can take the book and get the book and give it to their friends and see what's inside. And it's just amazing. So like my whole experience with this has been hella magical. And we haven't even gotten to Juliet Diaz yet. So, it's a really cool book, just from the perspective of all these photos. You've got really weird, different things. I tried to be different and in the material. And then you've got like CeeLo Thompson showing up and doing, beautiful art, and Juliet Diaz dropping just that Earth Mother wisdom, like right there at the beginning. And I just feel like I'm a guy who wrote about his philodendrons, there's all this really positive, awesome, constructive energy that just started being poured into it. So yeah, it was awesome. It's been an awesome experience.
That's great. And I just have to say, I love the watercolor art in it, because I love watercolor art. I do. Like anytime I'm looking for art for my labels and stuff like that, it's all watercolor. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was actually, you answered a question I had about who the artist was, how that came about, because there's especially, I think it's on like page 48, there's like that double page spread of of a room and discussing like the way light comes in, and it's just stunning. You want to crawl in and live there.
I know. I'm like, can I have that space? I want to knit on that little. Yeah, I know. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Real talk. Leandra and I could be trying to sell you socks or a VPN or that cereal everybody talks about, but we like to keep it witchy around here instead. And we can only do that because of the support of listeners like you. When you're joining my magical living community on Patreon, you're not only getting weekly shadow work journal prompts, new moon and full moon rituals, exclusive videos, exclusive meditations, plus bonus episodes of the Magic Kitchen podcast, but you're seriously keeping the lights on in the Magic Kitchen. Thank you for listening and reviewing the show. And if you're ready to meet me in the Magic Kitchen, pop over to patreon.com/Elise Wells and start your free trial. Let's deepen your magical practice together. So I think one of the things you said, you have some different things in here, and you do. And I think one of them is definitely the green flame. Mm-hmm. Could you speak a bit about what the green flame is and how it factors into the other 8 flames, I suppose, that you describe as the 9 flames?
Yeah. So you're definitely getting into the good stuff. So the best way to kind of explain the green flame is that from my perspective as an occultist, as a psychic, and of course as a witch, is that we're all part of a big universal fun factory, basically. And it's everything is interconnected, everything has a vibration, and everything is part of a big giant all. Okay. So I'm one of those weird, I don't like to call myself a monotheist because I'm actually a polytheist, but I'm a polytheistic monotheist. It's weird, right? I'm one of those
Not
folks.
weird. I get it.
Yeah. So I'm one of those folks. I'm just like, yeah, there's spirit and we're all from that. And that's what I know. And that's what I believe in my soul's genetic material, right? Like this is what I believe. So when I approach just witchcraft in the occult in general, I have this thing about me where I like to figure out how things work. Like I really, and part of it's my ADHD, and I just found out I might have a touch of autism. So I'm sure it's all part of that, where I really want to know how things work. And I'm fascinated with, especially when it comes to magic and magical and spiritual technologies. I find the application of mental power and spiritual energy to be fascinating. And I'm also one of those people who, my father was an engineer. I was raised very skeptical about a lot of things, and I was raised to be very skeptical. He's a very sci-fi, science-oriented person. That was my father. My mother's not. My mother's the exact opposite. I get my woo-woo crazy stuff from my mom, right? And my dad was pagan, but he was pagan in that way that you could be in the 90s, where it was just like, oh, I believe in reincarnation, and you're a pagan, right? So like that was more of his thing, and but he was brilliant, and he was a very intelligent man who taught me to question everything. And so, especially when it came to the spirituality, because people abuse spirituality and people will take advantage of your desire to understand the universe and your instinctive need as a human being who is sentient to understand what the hell all this stuff is going on about, right? So people are going to take advantage of that stuff, and so be weary, question everything. And when my psychic stuff started to spark up, that became an even bigger concern of like, let's really don't just because something in your head said to do it, don't go do that, right? Like my family was very like, I was lucky that I was the psychic kid who was having these really strange experiences, and my mother wanted to hear about them, not just because she was like a believer, right, but because she wanted to make sure I wasn't mentally ill. Like she was really checking in on me, like my son is saying he's talking to invisible things and it's not just an imaginary friend. Something like my parents responded in a very awesome way, I think, actually, like especially for the time and all the things. So I have always been encouraged to ask why does this thing happen this way? Why does energy interact this way? Why do I feel X when I touch an object or whatever, but so on and so forth. So over the years, all this is boiled down to this kind of understanding from my own personal trip, that if we all do come from this one kind of thing, right? And I refer to it as Z energy, right? Sometimes it's 0 point energy. If you want to get religious about it, we can call it God herself, whatever your trip is. I don't care. That's your stuff. But if we all come from this thing, right? So the Big Bang, right? The singularity. Then once everything came into being, then suddenly there had to have been divisions of things and multiplications of things, and it gets very complicated. And from physics, it gets very interesting, right? And I'm not one of those people who takes like pseudoscience and then applies it to my witchcraft. I take real science and go, oh, well, how did this work? And is there anything there for me, right? And a lot of the times, the only thing that's there for me is just spiritual inspiration, right? Like the Big Bang, I am hella inspired by the concept of the Big Bang. I am hella inspired by the concept of the stars being born in cradle nebulae, like, and how like if we're going to talk about like creation and worshiping something, like I'm going to worship the literal universe. That's my God.
Right.
Boom. So my work, like, because I can feel it. I'm part of it. I know the universe, right? I'm
all made of stardust.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm one of those people. I think we're on the same page here by looking at your faces. I think we're all pretty much on the kind of same page here. So all that being said, there are divisions of that one, right? And if we can do the first division in a lot of traditions, which is like the divine twins. You've got kind of the polarities, and then you can further divide those things down and further divide those things down. And I don't get into all of this in the book. This is just kind of some backup or some background as to how the green flame came about and why I wrote about it. But one of those divisions is the green flame. And in fact, for me, really, when I write about them, there's 9. There's really like 50 billion. Like, let's just be real. It's the universe, right? So I write about these very distinct flames, quote unquote flames, but really they're psychic wells. They're psychic energy that we can tap into as psychic beings who are part of the all. And so when we are channeling energy, when we are like, a lot of the times what we're channeling is like source energy, or we're channeling that moon energy, or we're channeling an elemental energy, or, whatever. The work of the 9 flames is really designed to give me and my students an access point to those energies to channel. And so we work with them in a very psychic way. I try to remove as much of the spiritual stuff as I can away from it, because I want you to have that experience and not take mine on, because my spiritual experience is mine. Don't take that. That's not yours, right? Yours is yours. And so it's about technique. It's about a psychic thing. It is not about a religious thing. But in all of that, when you identify it, and suddenly you have access to not just energy as a witch, that's really awesome to work with, but you also have this kind of understanding of the interplay and the interconnectivity of all of those things in this big funhouse universe of ours. So the green flame is the distillation of that. The green flame is the distillation of life force. It is the pervading energy of life to come and manifest itself. And there are like, we have the red flame, which is more of like meat life, right? It's more complex, biological, bloody life. But the green flame is powerful in that it's swept through. We can look at our planet. Great example. It swept through and it has engulfed our planet, right? Like that, the green flame, especially at other parts in our planetary evolution, we were a big green ball at one point, right? So like the green flame has been here. It has claimed Earth. Mother Nature is wrapped in the green flame. Mother Nature on Venus, maybe not. Maybe she's wrapped in something different or whatever, but she's still there, right? So the idea is that if the green flame exists here, then it has to exist everywhere else, because it's a universal force. And I have a bunch of reasons that we can get into in another episode as to why I think that, and I can break in some really cool science for that. But the understanding is life doesn't just exist here on our planet. It exists elsewhere. We haven't found it yet, but we know it has to exist. Mathematically, it has to exist. It is an impossibility that we are the only ones that have greenery, that have these things. So we can tap into this universal force, and it has these implications that I think are quite broad, right? And by working with the green flame, we can kind of distill all that and bring it into our homes, and we can use it to interface with the who I refer to, often as the Mother Nature, or Father Nature, or the Green Spirit, or whatever you want to say. But we're using this as a psychic experience. So the psychic energy of verdant life, that is the green flame. All of that to say that one sentence.
Elise, we were just talking about this. We just had like a half-hour conversation about, because we were referring to the Green Pantheon that you mentioned, and we're skipping ahead in our questions, but I think it's
no, that's good,
because I have been met in the community with resistance of the idea of the Green Pantheon, that Pantheon is exclusive to the culture, to the area, and I'm like, but no, because it's like, to me, like spirit is like this mycelial network that just travels. It goes everywhere. It's sentient. It's connected. And so what you experience here is not exclusive to what someone is experiencing halfway across the world. We see it in weather patterns. How like certain storms in the Sahara feed forests halfway across the world, and all these cool things that science is telling us exist, our ancestors already knew. We know inherently. And I love that conversation about the green flame. It's in the 9 flames. I want to know all about it. Tell me everything. Maybe not here. Like you said, another podcast, a whole other episode. But yeah, that is it's fun stuff for me. Like that gets me excited.
Yeah.
I mean, and it is tricky because you do have this idea that, for instance, like when I sat down, I started wanting to write about these plants that really are coming from like Asia, the South Pacific, South America. Like that's really where a lot of houseplants come from. And it was this kind of colonial mindset that went out really like in kind of in the Victorian era. That's really where things got a big push for people bringing plants into their home in this way. People have always been doing it. Like, I mean, we know this. It's kind of interesting. There's a wonderful book I cite. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it is in my book that goes through kind of the history of houseplants. And we know that people were bringing plants into their homes kind of almost immediately, like once structures were formed. So we've always wanted to do this. We took a really big interest in the Victorian era, and that was because of just the expansion of the Victorian era. And people were going into Asia. You had these British explorers going into Asia, taking plant specimens and then trying to bring them back and grow them. And sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. Most of the time it didn't. And they did this with animals and all kinds of things. The British were really bad. We're very, very bad at the time. And so there was this flood of interest by what is kind of considered the middle and the lower class to have plants in their homes, because that was previously only something that the rich could do. And we had all these plants coming in from other parts of the world. And then the idea and the concept of like house plants is kind of officially born. So we've had this very colonial mindset with houseplants like pretty much the whole time, because we don't have pothos that grows naturally in the British Isles or really anywhere where white people would have become white. Like that just isn't going to be a thing. So it was, I think right out the gate, you have to kind of acknowledge that, and you have to be able to say, okay, look, the truth of the matter is that like, no, we didn't do that. We weren't personally responsible for going and doing those things, but we are, as spiritual people who are mucking around with the spiritual vibrations of things, we are at least responsible for acknowledging that there's a spiritual connection that exists from somebody else to this thing that predates us, right? And so that I can do. I can 1000% get on board with that. But in doing that, you can't come in as an authority figure on that either. Like, come on now, right? So like my fear was no one's going to want this white bearded gay guy from the Midwest to tell them about this tropical plant and and the spiritual blah, blah, blah. Like I was really concerned about it. And to enough where it made me almost not write the book, right? And it was not fear of backlash. It was just fear of not being able to be respectful enough. And I have my own values with that, aside from worried about whatever the internet's going to say. So I sat down and I'm having this kind of personal conversation and meditation, and I have a full room full of plants, and all of the plants collectively were like, boring. Like it was this like sigh, boring.
Oh my God, dude,
and I'm
knock
like,
it
well,
off.
and it really was this thing of the plants were like, no, like we've been talking to you for a reason, man. Like we've been doing this stuff for a reason, dude. So having this just awareness that there's no way I could, even if I knew what those indigenous original connections were, there's no way I would be the person who could go in and talk about them to begin with. But I most certainly would never be able to articulate them to a Western audience of occultists or people who are interested in the occult, because I am not from that culture. And then I came, going from that culture to Western culture and having that bridge of our connection there. I don't have that at all. What I have is a very Western lens, and I can look at these plants and I can take Western occult philosophy and my own gnosis and my own psychic stuff. I can cram that together and I can write on that. And that's what I did. So we don't talk about the indigenous stuff unless it's something like a couple of times I'll reference something in the regards of like, oh, this might be or this has an indigenous medicinal use that you can actually you can make a tea from or whatever. Like I do that a couple of times, but we don't talk about the spiritual stuff. We don't talk about any of that because it's not the place. First of all, like it's not the place or the time, but we can't have that conversation about the spiritual energies without acknowledging that there's other connections to these things. What people need to also realize is that the cultures that these plants and stuff developed around don't have the same weird magical thinking that we do. They don't see substance in the same way that we see substance. They don't look at this thing as that, like, you have to go and meet the plant spirit and do it. Like, that is not what's going on. Things are way more organic and way more interconnected, and you don't have to do the bull crap that we tend to do to get to the end game, right? So, like, honestly, if you want to go work with the indigenous plant spirit version of, a pothos or whatever, you're going to have a totally different experience than whatever I could write about, like, completely. So we would be talking about two very different things at that point anyway. So what I can write about is what I can write about, and I can do it, respectfully, and with also the hope that people would take an interest in what was going on in those indigenous cultures. If that was something that, maybe there would be a little gateway there for you to understand, like, what's really going on with deforestation and plant poaching and, things like that. So it's kind of it was a tricky thing. My ultimate goal was just to get people to work with the green flame. And I mean, ultimately. And I feel like when you live in an urban setting, or I went from living in a very rural setting to living in a very big city and having no access. Like, I moved into my apartment. I moved in with a friend of mine and his partner, and they had in this really cute little condo apartment, no plants. There were no plants in the backyard on the patio. There were no plants. So the first night, I was like 19, so don't yell at me. But we got in a car, and I made him go around the neighborhood and steal gladiolas and, like, bulb plants from, like, from the big, like, apartment complexes and stuff, so that we had something. Like, we needed something. You got to have a plant in your home. Like, what the F, right? So, like, we did something. So that I'm that guy. I really feel like that's it. Like, just from a psychological perspective, you need that. But you can get to the spiritual stuff. Like, plants bring in so much, and I'm jumping all over the place here.
Okay, so all the things a 19-year-old could get in trouble for. I was just trying to put plants in my garden in my yard, and
I'm a nerd. I'm a total nerd. I guess it is a very nerdy thing to worry about. But
I love it.
We were
though.
terrified.
Like,
we were like, we're gonna get
honestly,
busted.
like, if at 19, I was, like, trespassing, like, breaking into abandoned houses. I guess they call it, what do they call it now? Urbaning or something?
Urbanex.
Yeah. But, like, that's what we were doing. We were having parties in abandoned houses. Like,
yeah.
I think stealing plants is a much more fun thing to have to explain to the police.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're 1000% correct. There are way stupider things I did, but I will absolutely say, I guess, really on the scale, that I guess stealing gladiolas and tulips wasn't the worst.
That's great. I love it.
At least in this century. Tulips a couple 100 years ago, maybe.
Right.
Hey there, witches. Did you know that there's an entire community out there dedicated to you and your journey? The Rebel Mystic community is a space where I offer my decades of knowledge and experience to witches just like you. I do this through live events, monthly mentoring, monthly rituals, a book club, and other resources like workbook pages and meditations. There is even a complete self-paced course library you can access. Check the link in the show notes to learn more about this community and how to become a member. Blessed be.
Totally kind of random, but I think listeners might be interested in this too. Have you read the book, The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert?
Mm-hmm.
I kept thinking about that in the beginning of your book when you were talking about the fact that none of these plants, maybe not none, but most plants people would have in their home are not native. Because that book, for those listening, is a novel. So it's not true, but her research is impeccable. And it's about a girl whose father was part of the collectors, the first generation of collectors of these plants. And she follows in his steps. And I'll kind of leave it at that. But it's a great, great book for anyone who works with plants to read. I thought it was super enlightening to, like, the history of houseplants and in a way that's not dry. It's a novel. It's super, super fascinating. Like, you can't put it down.
Elizabeth Gilbert, come on.
She's, in fact, when you were describing the way that it all came together with the artist, it made me think of Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, how she talks about ideas as these sentient beings. Like, the idea was who got that watercolorist, Yeah.
Actually, I can tell you this just because you brought her up. And so I before one of the things I credit to why this book was written so quickly was that just like literally maybe the month before I had read Big Magic. So I was Big Magic Prime. Like I was
Yeah.
plugged in. I was doing the thing. And
you said you wrote this quick. That's
oh yeah.
exactly like I read Big Magic. I did The Artist Way. I was on week 6 and I wrote my novel in 6 weeks. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And then right
Big
after that,
Magic
I
is
started,
Big
yeah.
Magic.
Yeah. And then I got into writing fiction, and that's a whole other thing. And I have three novellas out there. But yeah, like there's something. Elizabeth Gilbert is amazing. She is funneling very divine information into the world. And so it is bigger than Eat, Pray, Love. And you
Which
should.
I've still never read that.
I haven't
if
read
you can
Eat, Pray.
believe it.
I have no desire to read it. I
Me
remember when
either.
it was like part of the Oprah Book Club, and because I'm that old. And so, and I remember
Well,
like
I still say that. I'm like, oh, was it an Oprah book? And I'm like, wait, she hasn't really done that in like 20 years.
she still does, but I don't pay attention anymore. But yeah, like, but I remember like when it was like this big thing, and if you were a semi-spiritual person, like you flooded to that, just like The Secret, like people flooded to that. It's like, okay,
Oh my gosh.
but that was such a thing. Anyway, all this to say, yes, go read Big Magic if you haven't yet, because that's, especially if you're a creative person, that's a phenomenal book.
The one thing that I wanted to touch on, because you kind of touched on this in the colonialism of houseplants, like the commodification of houseplants and
That's
the
it. That's where I
commodification
wanted to
of
go.
like living things.
Mhm.
So my work primarily is with plant spirits, but outdoors, because I kill them. Indoors, I'm notorious. I'm sorry. I have a Venus flytrap. She's doing great. One plant. I think it's because I have a prime spot for her. But so I see a lot in the people I work with and the community in general, like, oh, go get this herb for this. Like it's a very commodity mindset. What are your thoughts on that with working with these plants? Like, how do they feel about it? And like, how do we fix that?
This is a really good question, actually. You guys are awesome. You guys are asking really good stuff. All right, so to be honest with you, it's annoying, right? But it's also kind of this thing that comes from our shared cultural witchy thing, right? Where we're kind of hoarders. We're all hoarders. We have this idea that you need all of the herbs because one day you may end up needing that calendula that you never touched for 20 years, but you may need it one day. At 20 years, it's no longer good because it's all dried up and all the stuff's gone, but you still have it, thank God. I literally just went through my magic closet of all of the I've collected over my witchcraft practice since I was a kid. Like I just hoarded things and traveled with them and took them everywhere. And, and I was going through and I'm like, why do I have all this shit I never use? It's at some point you have to realize it's just creating energy and taking energy. Like that's this. And I'm like, I'm done with it. So I just did this whole purging of herbs, and I took my cauldron out and I poured every herb bag, because of course I had herbs in bags, which you just shouldn't do for long periods of time. And they were just desiccated. I was like, I'm so sorry. And I like poured them into the cauldron.
Dust.
You've been in this plastic bag for 7 years. I'm so sorry. And and I poured them in the big cauldron, and I poured some oil on them, and I did a prayer. I threw some resin on it, and then I lit that sucker on fire, and I just released the energy, whatever was there, just released it and said, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to hold you up in your process all this time. We have this thing as witches where again, we a lot of the kind of the cultural stuff there is very cottage core. You need all of your, all of the jars, and you need all this stuff. My husband is totally this guy. He's got a million jars with all of the herbs and all of the things, and he loves it. Like, and I go and I'm like, babe, don't you want to find a closet or like a shelf or something? He's like, no, I like looking at them. It makes me feel connected. I'm like, oh, okay, oh yeah. So like he would never dream of doing what I did, of going in and throwing everything out, or throwing into the cauldron and catching on fire. Like he would never dream of that. But I am that witch that I think I've just been doing it. I don't want to sound old or like gatekeeping. I've just been doing it for a long time, and I've just realized like I don't need most of it. And at least I don't need to hoard most of it, because I can go find it again. Like it is, for instance, rose petals, great example. So you got like your rose petals that you can go buy these little teeny tiny, because they're coming from a very specific rose that is supposed to be very fragrant, but usually by the time you get it, it's not. But these little teeny tiny rose petals, and you'll pay like $3 or $4 for this bag of them, and then again they'll sit there forever, blah blah blah. And we know that, oh, rose is for love, and rose can bring tranquility, and it can help with soothing over misunderstandings and all these things. So you're like, oh, one day I might have a misunderstanding with my husband. I want rose petals to fix this. Here's the deal, friends. Do you know what's going to be way more potent than those rose petals that you went to the store and you bought? Rose petals that you saved from your husband the last time he bought you roses.
Right.
Those are going to have a magical efficiency that nothing else is going to have, right? Like in the same way. So why don't you just flip your roses over, dry them out, clip the petals off, and save them? Like, and then you can use them, and you're not going to have all of these rose petals, right? You're going to have just enough that you will actually use in a love spell or whatever. So I started thinking about things a little differently, and trying not to hoard as much. When I started working with plants, the thing that got a little weird for me was that, yes, I do have ADHD and I touch rheumatism, and I do collect. Like I get into something and I'm really into it. When it came to plants, oh my goodness. So I have, again, I've a lifelong crystal collection. I have a very nice crystal collection. I'm kind of a dragon. Like I definitely have my jewels. And so I did the same thing with plants. Like I instantly just got into this, and it wasn't because I wanted to commodify them. Like it was coming out of this, like I was curious. I wanted to know about the weird tissue structure of this begonia, like, just like weird stuff like that. So I went and I got a little obsessive with it. And then I found myself in a home with more than 2,000 plants. We have a big home. There's 4 of us that live here. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not like we live in a
space.
and like an apartment and have all this. But it's still a jungle, and I got to the point where I realized I had messed up. I had gotten too many plants and I could not properly take care of them. I couldn't give them the attention they needed, because a lot of people, you have this idea that all a plant needs is water and light. And it's not true. They need a lot more than that. And they probably need a lot more water than you think they do too. Or at least a lot more attention in some way than you would assume. Right. And so when you've got 2,000 plus plants, it's real hard to go through and, water them every day, or water them, every week, and dust them and check them for bugs and mites and da 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 da. And then sometimes, you write a book and you got to go away for a couple of days, right? Or you got to go away for a couple of weeks, and you really don't have the bandwidth to take care of shit. So it became this thing for me where it was more like I felt really guilty I felt like I had promised these plants this great life, this great party life in a house full of witches. And it turns into me being like, oh crap, that thing is going to die if I don't, So I went through this weird thing with it where I feel like I'm so glad I got all the plants I did, because I learned a lot and I wrote about everything, and it was all practical purposed. And then I was able to give a lot of my plants away. So if it was something that like, oh yeah, I know I can't take it up, I was like, hey, Coven brother, or hey, Coven sister, like have a plant. Everyone got plants for a couple of years. Like even last Yule, they were still getting plants. So that's just going to be what it is, for probably a while. And so I started to kind of thin my collection out, and it wasn't because I don't love them. It was just got down to like, well, I can either take care of 400 or 500 very, very well, or I can have 1,000 to 2,000, whatever, that are struggling. And that's just not good. So kind of moving from that. So this commodification of things is interesting because, on one end, we want to have access to a thing we may possibly need at another time. Right. And all of us are descendant of people who survived a depression and the Dust Bowl era and, all of these things. So, but we're also all people who grew up with like Harry Potter and all of these other, and The Little Witch, and like all these other examples of like witches living in huts, collecting jars of stuff, right? Like it just is part of our aesthetic at some point. And so you just kind of, it's weird, right? But we are collectors. We are anthropologists in our own way. And I think we have to kind of acknowledge that, like, and accept that, but also kind of realize that to circle back, like everything has energy, and you're hoarding these things. Sometimes that energy can go wrong, right? Or it can be ill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not respectful of the energy sometimes to hoard it when somebody else could benefit. Like I was thinking about when you were talking about giving away the plants, I actually think that's maybe the whole reason you had them in the first place, was to be part of this sacred reciprocity, that you cared for them, they gave you something, and that you could profile them and write about them and understand them. And now you get to pass them on to the next person.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a good metaphor really for what we do as teachers in the craft too, is we pass that on. Like we, in a way, if especially like I was kind of one of those kids who knew I was going to be a teacher. Originally, I thought that was in the school system. So I did teach for 4 years in Baltimore in the school system. And then, long story short, I'm now teaching the craft instead. And I now realize after letting go of a lot and letting the universe lead me to that release of like, the career I spent way too much money and way too much time on, like actually turned out wasn't right for me. Actually, it still turned out to be useful because I'm still giving back that gift of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like where my path is going to continue to lead me. Not all people who become advanced in the craft have to teach. Also, I always like to remind people
not
of that.
at all.
Like,
no.
Yeah, you don't even have to have a coven. Like even my mentor in my coven, we were fairy tradition. So actually my high priestess was Orion Foxwood's initiate. So we're like right in that lineage. But my mentor in the coven, not my high priestess, she has no interest in ever running a coven. She likes to mentor within, but she has no, interest in moving on. So anyway, again, all that to say, we're very similar. I have to say, because we talk the same way in our podcast. We're always going everywhere, but getting it back. I do think that's a good exercise for witches to do, is try to do it with less and try to see it when you are struggling. Like I'm a Taurus. I like to have my stuff. So when I moved to Greece, actually, I only brought suitcases. So I couldn't bring any of my stuff. I could bring clothes and necessities that I knew I couldn't buy here. That's a whole nother conversation, but there's not a lot of commodities in Greece. And I also couldn't bring my magical tools. I'm not going to risk an athame getting confiscated or my wand that's handmade breaking. So I had to start from scratch, and it was the plants, it was the land that called me to Greece and the land that gave me the tools again. So now 3 years later, I have statues and things that are on my altar, but it still is so focused around, like I don't have any land of my own. I don't even have a balcony. So it's focused around the plants I can forage, the flowers that call to me. And, I still bring them onto the altar. I still facilitate them. I make my flower essences. Like I have that toollessness in a sense, like, cause I use the flower essence that I made, but then I use it up. I'm done saving it for a special occasion. I use it now. Yeah. And that is like some serious empowerment that I didn't know I needed.
Absolutely. That's awesome. I love hearing that.
On the flip side, with me and my herb surplus, I opened a tea business. And 7 years
That's
later, I'm still here.
That would be the thing to do. Yeah.
So now instead of buying little jars, I'm buying by the pound. So there are avenues, but yeah, I think it's good to know when it's time to let go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you enjoying the show? If you are, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review. It helps us to reach more listeners like you and to keep doing the Magic Kitchen podcast. Thank you. We have to talk about the divination system you have invented. Variomancy. Did I say it correctly?
Yeah. Okay. Variomancy. Yes. Oh, well, what would you like to know about it? Let's start with that.
It reminds me of tasseomancy. Tea with lip reading. Okay.
100%. Yeah. So I am, again, a big nerd, and over the years I collect divination systems. Who doesn't, right? And I'm kind of obsessed with divination. And one of my partners, he makes divination systems and tools like talking boards and spinning wheels and tarot. He's very we're very into the concept of divination and how that might work in our lives. And one of the things that I learned of a decade or so ago was I was taking a workshop and on the Lenormand cards. And one of the things that the teacher had brought up was that all of the symbols in the Lenormand cards are actually symbols that are commonly found in tasseomancy. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. And then I learned that a lot of systems just kind of take the cheat sheet of tasseomancy of like this little symbol means this and have used it and kind of pulled from it. So I've been just kind of using it as like a default for like a default code, right? A little cipher for divination. for a long time. And it's just easy. It's like, oh, okay, bird, right? Cross, X. Sometimes I've seen like faces, and sometimes it's more complicated, but usually it's just really little tiny things. And if you're into divination, then you're seeing these things everywhere. You can't help it, but start to see the little cross and the little bird, little, like they're just everywhere. So it was just seemed like a natural application for plant leaves that were variegated to kind of look at that and go, well, how do we apply this? Variomancy is a little more complicated than that. The way that I want everyone to be introduced to it is that it's as easy as tasseomancy. I don't want people to be like nervous about it. Because I went to go teach this at the International Divination event. So that was the world launch. It was at the International Divination event. It was a big deal. Mary Greer. I taught this to Mary Greer. It was the first person I taught this to. Can I just tell you how nervous that I was?
I was going to say that's way too much pressure.
Oh my God. I was like, core memory installed. Like it was a thing. Like, oh my God, it was horrible. So anyway, it was great, but it was like nervous making. Anyway, so it's more complicated than just the tasseomancy, but I want people to understand that doing this sort of thing is very common. Like we have examples of it everywhere. But the idea is that you are going to develop a relationship with a plant that produces variegated leaves, and you're going to kind of dedicate this plant and its relationship to certain areas or regions of your life, and it is going to provide information for you in the way that a map might provide information for you as to how things in that area in your life are going. You can ask direct questions, which is how this all began. So I have a beautiful, I wish I would have brought it in. It now lives in my bathroom because it gets lots of humidity in my bathroom, but I have a Calocasia mojito, a Calocasia escalanta mojito, and they are these beautiful, big kind of, they're elephant ear plants. And they have these, it's called a military or an army pattern to it, but it's a splash, aka the mojito. The mojito variegation is this splashy kind of mottled, beautiful look. But every leaf is different, and the patterns will come in all kinds of different things. They look like if somebody took just a beautiful green leaf and then flicked ink on the leaf or watercolor, right? Paint on the leaf, and then just let it sit and dry. And that's what the leaves look like. So they're like my favorite. I absolutely adore them, and they get very big and beautiful, and it's a really great plant. But the leaves are short-lived. So they're only going to last a couple of weeks. And then because the plant is constantly putting off new leaves, so the older leaves kind of die off and the energy gets absorbed back into the plant. And you just have this beautiful little cycle going on. So I have that plant dedicated to the underworld. And that was because it came into my life right about the time my father passed away. And it just seemed like this natural thing. And the idea is the roots are in the underworld. The leaf is in our world, like the stem and the leaf, these things are in our world. So it can bring information up for the underworld. That was my original kind of concept with it. It worked out fantastically. So yeah, that works, folks. And so I developed this relationship. And then I started looking at the leaves and scrying into the leaves. And then it became this thing of, I can bring tasseomancy, I can bring these little other things to make it easier when I'm trying to explain what the hell I'm doing to people. When I do it, it's all scrying, it's all really personal gnosis stuff with the symbols and stuff. But for everybody else, like if you're just jumping in, do this thing and relate to these systems that you already know, because then you can build gnosis from it, right? Then you can make it your own. So that's what I do. And that's essentially what variomancy is. And so I've got plants that are dedicated just to, like the underworld, for instance. I get messages from my ancestors through the Calocasia mojito, which, it comes from South America. There's nothing like there's no ancestral energy there except what I assigned to it, right? And there's crystals and the substrates and all of the stuff. Read the book, you can, but and then I have a beautiful Monstera. I'm looking at it right now. I have looking at cuttings that are rooted. A Monstera alba, which is this white variegated, beautiful, leafed plant that tells you a story with every single time it puts off a new leaf. It's this really beautiful thing. So if you're into divination and if you're into working with, honestly, it kind of feels it's the most magical thing to kind of talk about, really, because you go to the plant and you say, hey, I need to know about this, and then it produces a leaf for you with an answer. It's like the coolest in the world.
The coolest thing.
It's so cool. So I was shocked that no one had written about it, that no one was doing it. I was like, surely I am not the one who stumbled upon this first. Surely this has to be a thing. No. And Llewellyn is really good at knowing this kind of stuff because they have been writing and they've been publishing divination books for over 150 years. So it's right about 150 years. So they've been doing it for a long time and they know everything. And they probably have a copy of a book, even if they didn't publish it. They have copies of books that you just wouldn't believe. They've a huge library. And so like it's kind of like Library of Alexandria vibe library. Like Llewellyn has a massive, massive library. And so they'll know and they will be able to go find out. Right. And so I sent the manuscript in and it had this little disclaimer for my editor. And I was like, I cannot find references to anything like this anywhere online. I don't see anything like it in any of my books. I've asked 3 of my old teachers. They don't know. And I have sent this to these other teachers who have all confirmed that it works and that they have never heard of it before. So we are probably in a situation where this is a brand new thing. And if that's the case, I really want to be able to say that. And I really want to be able to, because it's so fun, right? And it's so unique. And no, it was new. So that hasn't been done before. And so it was an honor to like discover this thing. I felt like I felt like I discovered it. It felt like it existed, right? It's scrying into leaves. Like that's the simplest basic kind of idea with it. But the methodology and the modality for how those things happen, that's all me. And it was really cool to be like, oh, I did a thing. I did a new thing. And I like adding to the conversation that we have as a cultist. Like, I feel like as a writer, I've just inherited a conversation that like people were having before me. Like Silva Ravenwolf had it before me, Scott Cunningham before her, Doreen Valiente before her, going back, Aleister Crowley. Like we can go back. Anybody who published a book on the damn subject, right? We're having this conversation. The old occultists used to take swipes at each other and their books. I don't know if you ever pay attention to it, but they would be like, you read the foreword and it would be like 5 pages of, well, so-and-so says that the etheric works like this. I disagree. Right? And this is how they would have because they were literally having a conversation with each other in their books. And so we don't do that now. We have online, we've got podcasts, like we've got easier ways of going about it, but we're still having a conversation. And I'm really big on like adding to the conversation and not just parroting the conversation. Like I will not put a book out if I don't feel like there's something new in it, at least something, right? And it stopped me from putting out some cool stuff. Like I think I had some really cool stuff that I wanted to put out, but when I would sit back with it, I'd go, well, wait a minute. Like Evo Dominguez Jr. talked about this, or Amy Blackthorne talked about this in this way. And all I would be doing would be collecting their ideas and putting them together in a certain way for you. And that's not nearly as cool as just you doing it yourself and me saying, hey, I was inspired by this in a podcast. I can say that and then be done with it. I don't need to go into this huge, experience and all this research and all this stuff for it. I can just whatever. So all that to say, yes, it's new, and Variomancy was this really fun thing that just kind of was born out of this experiment. I mean, it's really what it was, just this experiment of, is this going to work? And oh my God, this thing works really well. It was really cool. And
that's it. That's the essence of magic, I think. Is to experiment, to see what works. Like I recently, actually, no, as of this airing, it won't be out yet, but in June of 2024, I'm teaching in my community, my online community space, about how you don't have to cast a circle. You can cast a spiral. You can cast a Triskel. You don't have to use a wand. You can use your hand. What about Stangs? What about a Rabdos? What about, and this happened in the video by accident, when you go outside to do the ritual, the land provides something right in the space that you decided that you were going to do this ritual in. Maybe you should use that, even if you did bring your wand from home.
Yeah.
Like it's that flexibility that we learn with experience, and it has to be done. Like that's Thorn Mooney. I remember she wrote this and it just was everything to me. Witchcraft is orthopraxic. It's not orthodoxic. We can sit across the table from people who believe absolutely contrary ideas to ourselves, with respect to people's rights and things, of course, but, they just believe something a little bit different. But it doesn't matter because we're all doing something. So we want to talk about the doing and how that changed and how we did it a little bit different and who inspired what.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be open to researching other cultures, right? And this is my thing as a magician, is that I think a lot of like in retrospect, as I look back on my path and my journey, my experience and my research and the way that I've had to approach research in the past and have conversations with people, and what I've realized is honestly, like occultism is a lot more racist than we think. And the reason why is that we tend to force cultures from that aren't, white centric into a white centric box and then demand that it perform a certain way. And you can't really do that, right? And so like that's with the house plants, like that's kind of that idea. Like we demand that this indigenous, no, we can't do that. So we're in this situation where it's like you've got this tricky thing that you want to explore. You've got this history there for it, and you want to be respectful, and you want to, hopefully you want to be respectful about it. But a lot of people, like I think us here having this conversation, we would be the people at the table that would shut up and listen, right? But a lot of people don't know that you have to do that, right? And part of the colonial racist kind of thing that I have noticed is this going into these spaces and these topics and then like again demanding that it works a certain way. What we really need to be doing is shutting the hell up and when we are lucky enough to be invited into these spaces, that we are an observer and that we can go, oh, you know what? Why is it that no other culture except for our little white Western culture cast as circles? You don't see circles cast anywhere. There's no need for this huge energetic structure to exist if we're talking about Mexican American magic, or if we're talking about indigenous magic that came from Eastern Europe. None of this was real. None of that happened. It was a later group that created this and said this has to happen this way because this is a da da da. And let me explain too, as if I can get off on another tangent, that a lot of this
Of
stuff is,
course.
in my opinion, is created by people who have a natural gift, like it's written about people who have a natural gift who don't know how to explain it, or have a difficult time explaining it to people who don't have a natural gift. And so if I were to, if as a psychic being, if I didn't have a background in any of this, and I were to just sit down and explain to you, like, well, what do you like? Because I have students who say, well, I want to do what you do, or how do you do what you do? And I'd be like, I don't know, I just do it. Like it's so hard to refine that into words that make sense to other people. It's even harder to put it in a formula that you can duplicate, right? So, in my opinion, a lot of this stuff is propagated and exists solely so that we can have a shared experience that is replicatable, right? And so, I don't necessarily think that even the ancient magicians of the Solomons blah 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 were casting necessarily doing circles and things for the reasons that we assume they were, or the things that we've tacked on over the years. Because if you look at the root of
Well,
it, like no, you get like you cast a thing for this. That's it. You don't need a whole lot that came after it that somebody wrote about and added on in the 60s or the 80s or the whatever. So my whole thing, just bottom line is, you do it well, and that's all that matters, right? Like I have no skin in your game, but I will say that if we're able to look at other cultures respectfully, what we'll probably find is they're doing things more efficiently because they didn't go through all of this. We have to build all these steps in between. They just do it, right? And it's as a psychic, I just do things. I just tap into something, and I'm not the only one, like, by any means. So it's this thing of like, we when we're conceptualizing the occult or a metaphysical experience, we end up putting all these trappings and things in that are truly meant to be guides for the
yeah.
experience so that so you can tap in and you can do this even if you aren't super psychic or whatever. But I think that over time that those things can be very, very constraining, and they can be solidifying in a way that not only outdates your practice in comparison to what's going on with, again, this general conversation that we're all having, but it also really limits your ability to understand magic as a whole and what's going on with energy as a whole. Like it rocked my world, coming from a place of studying, like Wicca and the threefold law and all of this stuff, going out of that and being like, oh, no one else is talking about this. Oh, well, why? And then you learn the stuff behind it and the political stuff behind it, and what's going. And you go, oh, so this isn't even a thing. This is just a little training wheel comfort thing for everybody else. Holy shit. What does that actually mean about your magic then? right? And then I go study a different tradition and have a very different conversation with people. And then I go back to a tradition where that's threefold law is a very important thing and have a very different, so we're just in this place where you can't really accept things as law if you just blindly, like, I don't think you should do that, because I think that gets us into this very colonial mindset of not going in and accepting and being a student of life and being a student of culture and of whatever magic these people might want to share with us. Instead, we're going in and we're looking for ways that we can make new monkeys dance. Right, because we're just those explorers taking animals from the Amazon and bringing them up to Queen Victoria and putting them in a cage. Like, otherwise, that's what we're doing. So for me, it's really important to let the energy teach us, and that 1000% comes from an indigenous teaching that I was raised with, because I'm from an area where we had a lot of indigenous people. We have a lot of powwows and things like that, and my family made sure that we went every year to a powwow and we sat down and we shut the up and we listened to people, right? Like, and that was a core value in my family. I talk about this stuff now and I almost I get a little teary-eyed because I realize how lucky I was, like, in comparison. I thought my mom was just this weird hippie chick. Like, I had no idea, but she was really trying to install these, like, very important values in me that as a magician, I can look back now at almost 40 and go, holy crap. Like, I'm so glad I learned to just kind of shut up and listen, when, especially in a situation where I'm the guest, right? Except here, because I'm just talking away, but yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, no, and that's what we love to do here on the Magic Kitchen, is just feel like we're sitting around the table in the kitchen, having tea, talking as we would.
It's working.
So how can people find you? Where can they buy Houseplant Hortocculture? Where can they listen to Modern Witch? All the things.
Are you teaching anywhere?
You can go to modernwitch.com. It's all there. Modernwitch.com. It took a long time to get that domain, and we got it. And yay, we're using it. I have a podcast that's entering season 12, 14 years.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a huge feat.
It is. It's kind of, it is in that way of, like, you don't realize it until it's a thing and you're like, oh, I've been doing this for a really long time. And I just started podcasting in my bathroom because it was the quietest room in the house where I could shut doors and actually get away from everybody else. And now I have
from the toilet.
Pretty much. Yeah. I interviewed Good Day Parma, or Fio Good Day Parma. I interviewed him in my bathroom for like one of my first episodes. It was the most embarrassing experience ever. I can look back on it now. I'm sure he's got this horror story of, like, oh, when I met Devin Hunter, I sat in his bathroom.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure not.
Right? I'm sure he's got some horrible story. No. But yeah, so it was this thing that turned into a thing, and it's been great. So, but it is around, and we're about to start season 12. And every season I do something a little different. I kind of tweak it a little bit, and I'm going into more of like a narrative style with this one. I'm really excited about. And so that'll start in right when this airs. I think just about the time of this podcast airing, the first episode will be out. So that's happening. I'm producing a bunch of shows now. So that's kind of my summer project, is that I'm producing podcasts for other people. So one of those is the Circle is podcast with my husband, Matt Oren, and Rachel True. They're doing this show together, which is kind of incredible. Like, I'm just a fly on the wall because I'm the producer. So I just listen and I edit and do all this stuff. But when we record, I'm there with them just in case. And they're like bringing in like actual celebrities. And I'm just sitting here like, what, how did it, like, it's just weird stuff. Like, just wait, like really just wait. So it's awesome. Very weird. Like, Rachel's a celebrity, like, just to begin with. So just to be like, I'm on a Zoom with Rachel True. And like, that's just weird. And then because she's the chick from The Craft, right? She was the funny one. Like, you just go through like, but all of this to say, it's really trippy and it's really cool and it's a really fun experience. So doing that, and then we've got a bunch of other shows. So I started a network, so podcast network, and that's just the summer is just going through and producing shows and getting them up there. And so there will be something coming out every week we'll have something by the time August hits. There'll be stuff dropping pretty consistently on our website, but also on the YouTube. So come check us out. And we do live streams all the time and all kinds of good stuff. It's a really fun community that I unlike you guys that were really smart about creating a community for your podcast and all that stuff. I did not do that. I waited a really long time to do that because I honestly was under the impression that nobody cared. And I was just this dude who did a podcast, and I have this. I was discrediting the actual people who were listening and the listeners and the people who were listening and the listeners, the fans. I was discounting those people, and they kind of started coalescing on their own. And then I was like, oh, I guess we should do a thing. So now we have this beautiful community, and you can go on Facebook and join us. And there's over 1,000 people, and there's other podcasters too. Like, it's not just the Devin show. Please don't, everyone. I hate when it's the Devin show. I hate the Devin show. So we have other podcasters on. You guys are joining us. Drop your shows. Like, please, like it's really just Modern Witches getting together, doing a thing, and it's pretty fantastic. So you go to modernwitch.com. You can find all the books. You can find me. You can find the other people and things involved in Modern Witch. Those are all there on modernwitch.com. And if you ever see me online, I'm never going to approach you for a reading. So I'm one of those unfortunate authors who has like 15 million scammer accounts on like TikTok and things like that. If you want a reading from me, you got to come hunt my ass down, and you got to tempt me. You got to like make offerings of like chocolate and gold and I don't know what else, but like it is not an easy. I'm not going to come to you with a message from my fake ancestors for you. I promise. Okay. So and that's a big thing going on in the world right now. And TikTok.
Yeah, it's so rampant. It's rampant. Yeah.
The problem.
Well, Devin, thank you very much for being on the Magick Kitchen podcast. Everybody go get Houseplant Hortocculture, because I think it's just the book I was waiting for, and I know I'm not the only one.
It's a really great book. I love it. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And thanks for reading my book and listening to me ramble about my crazy occult ideas.
Enjoyed this conversation. I don't know about rambling. Merry meet,
merry part, and merry meet again.
Thank you for joining us on the Magick Kitchen podcast. Please visit my website, leandrawitchwood.com, for news, information, and more episodes.
I'm Elise Wells, and I can be found at Seeking Numina on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and seekingnumina.com. That's Seeking, Numina.